Hi again, we're here for Module 4, the last video. Well, not the last video, but the last lecture video we have for Module 4. We're going to be looking at content features in Liferay DXP. So, effective content management is a large part of what is going to keep users coming back to our websites, that they're able to quickly find the content that's relevant to them. So we want to make sure that we're increasing visibility with SEO, as well as making the content on our website easily searchable and organizing that content. So Liferay has a lot of features to deal with this. You know, typically you might have to use a combination of different services or products or software, but Liferay DXP addresses each of those needs. So how does it do that? So if we can remember, Livingstone Loop was the intranet for Livingstone. And so it's going to have a lot of HR documents, contracts with vendors, various customer information, sensitive documents that not everyone should have access to. In addition, all of the outward-facing sites, such as the Livingstone hotels and resort sites, they're going to have primarily informational content. The Livingstone Live site, that's going to be responsible for digitalizing all of their existing content, migrating that to Liferay DXP, and then also putting out all these new travel blogs that are going to be published on a regular basis. So how does that work in Liferay? Well, in Liferay, we refer to content as an asset. So we have multiple tables in our databases dealing with assets, such as asset entry, asset tag, asset category. And a lot of the entities in Liferay are already configured to be assets, and they're already plugged into the asset system. If you'll remember, under the product menu, we have the site administration panel, and under that, the content and data panel that we've gone to look at blogs, web content, etc., etc. All of these are Liferay assets. So you can see them listed here from web content to wikis. These are all integrated into the asset system. First, let's talk about sharing assets. When you are under that site administration panel, that's site specific. So if you go in there and add blogs or forms, those aren't going to be shared across your sites. If you want to do that, you'll need to add assets either to the global site or by creating a content set. We won't go into that latter one in this video, but you can read more about that. So again, if you want to create assets that can be used anywhere, you want to put those either in the global site, or the second option is to use the content sets. So what does the asset framework involve? Why would you want to use it, and what benefit do we get from it in our existing entities such as blogs, web content, all of those? The first thing is each asset is going to have not the same metadata, but it's going to have metadata that can be used for classifying and organizing it. In addition, we have specific permissions and configurations for assets, as well as the ability to relate assets to one another. And when we're talking about organization, in Liferay we use asset tags and asset categories to group assets together. There's also a little bit of collaboration involved here. We have asset comments and asset ratings. And finally, our assets are also configured to integrate with our workflow definitions. So we just spent a little bit of time in the previous slide going over the asset framework. How does it interact with the rest of Liferay? Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we can manage assets. So what are the features for managing assets? We have repositories, for example, file repositories. We have folders to group assets. Particularly, we have for web content, we have web content structures that allow you to basically define different types of web content as well as document types. So we have our document table in our Liferay database, and you can create different document types. So specifically for these two assets, documents and web content, there's a further way to classify those using a type. But in general, we have the folder structure, we have types for several of our assets, and finally, for all assets, you can use our tags and categories frameworks. So there's a lot of ways to organize assets in Liferay. As I mentioned, for web content, we have web content structures, and for documents, we have document types that can be used to further identify specific kinds of documents or web content. This type and structure information can be used to further enhance searchability for your documents and web content. So apart from assets, there's another way to go about creating reusable sections and components on your web page. This is new in Liferay 7.2. So we've touched on it briefly before and looked at page fragments. Page fragments are perhaps another way to handle putting content on your web pages besides our web content entities and our other asset entities that we use. So with a page fragment, you can make them in two different ways. You can either use the section builder if you're not a front-end engineer who's familiar with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So using the section builder, anyone can go in and create their own fragment using that user interface. Essentially, that's what it is. If you are front-end savvy, what you can do is directly use the editor in Liferay to inject your JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and create those page fragments. And you'll see basically 3 panels, one for JavaScript, one for CSS, one for HTML. And the 4th panel on the bottom right of the screen is going to have that simulation or that view of what your page fragment is going to look like. You create this page fragment and you reuse it across all of your content pages in Liferay DXP. Remember that page fragments are used in content pages. It's just another way to quickly get your websites up and running, have them organized, make them searchable, all of that good stuff. And you can choose whatever way works best for you. All right, we're at our last knowledge check for the last module in the Liferay DXP Fundamentals course. When you're ready, feel free to fill this out. We'll go over it in a moment. So an asset is one of the types of content on the platform. Really, we could say that asset is another way of referring to content on the Liferay DXP platform. And many of Liferay's entities are built on the asset system and the asset framework. And developers can integrate with the asset framework easily too. It's designed to be used with custom entities. You can specify how you want it to be displayed, and then you can use it in an asset publisher widget. If you want to share your assets, you're going to need to put them on the global site or use content lists. And for the third point here, types and structures are one way to organize assets. They can be used specifically for documents and web content. The other way of organizing assets includes repositories, folders, and the asset tags and categories framework. And finally, if you want to have another way to create reusable content on your web pages, you can use page fragments. You can design them using either the site builder, or front-end developers can directly use JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to make these page fragments. All right, we're finished. That's the last lecture. We just have a couple of exercises left. See you there.